Good evening, all of you. We have with us Dr. Sreeradha Datta. Welcome, ma'am. She happens
Thank
to be
you.
Senior Fellow with VIF and a non-resident Senior Fellow with Institute for South Asian Studies, University of Singapore. Sreeradha Datta has written her latest book, The Act East Policy and Northeast India, with Vitasta Publishing. So we are here to talk about her latest book. So, ma'am, my first question to you is: How tell us something in brief about your academic journey and what makes you interested in Northeast of India?
I was born and brought up in West Bengal. So there is a kind of a close affinity with the region because it's lying right next to us. And also in the academic journey, while I was looking at South Asia in my specialization in during my master's program, but subsequently I was, awarded a scholarship which actually allowed me a lot of travel grants. And that proposal that I suggested for that particular fellowship was on the Northeast. And that travel grant actually really opened my eyes to the kind of, it's impossible to understand Northeast if you don't go there, if you don't see for yourself. Because while we do say Northeast, it's actually every single state, all the 8 states, then it was seven and then Sikkim was added. Each state has a very distinct personality, and the whole landscape, terrain, the underlying issues are very different. But while it's difficult to kind of talk about them individually, but give thanks to this grant where I spent a lot of time in Assam, different parts, this was also the time when there was a lot of unrest. Bodo unrest was going on. There was a lot of ethnic issues happening there. I also was able to travel to Meghalaya again, which had a lot of issues on the ethnic front. And I think that was how my interest in the Northeast came about. And then subsequently, I started a fellowship at the Institute for Defense Studies. And I was the first civilian who was given a fellowship on the Northeast, because till then, Northeast was always a domain for the security. Security people. So, I mean, people who were part of the security forces, the security, officials. So, me as a civilian was, I think that was again something that was very happy to work on. And over the years, because I started working, in fact, my first book, which is also before I did my PhD, actually was on the Northeast. It was called
Okay.
Northeast Complexities. And thanks to that book, again, I was, there a lot of book discussions took place. I got a lot of invitation from the Northeast University. So my opportunity to visit that place was a recurring theme in my, whole trajectory of my academic journey, I would say. And then subsequently, of course, later years, just before I joined VIF, I was for 6 years a director of an institute which was under the Ministry of Ministry of Culture,
Okay.
located in Kolkata. But because, as you know, central funds, there are lots of central funds for the Northeast region. And because of my interest and because this institute research domain also allowed that, I was actually able to open up research institutes in most of these states, which made me go back to the state for those 6 years. Almost every month I was there, whether in Arunachal or Nagaland or Assam or Manipur. So it was a recurring theme, and I think this particular book is actually encapsulates that the last 6 years that I spent going up and down, and a whole lot of work that got done with those Northeast centers.
Right. For rest of the India, Northeast seems to be a monolithic entity, but then, as your book tells us, that it's a very different domain. It's not a. It's a very heterogeneous community living over there. Is it correct, ma'am?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's difficult to, like I'm saying, it's difficult to talk about Arunachal and Meghalaya in the same breath. I mean, you just can't compare. The whole, landscape is different. The agricultural pattern is different. People are different. I mean, I'm not even talking about land. I mean, food and those kind of things. Even most generic issues like how a particular people, depending on the land pattern, your agriculture pattern, your trends, your industry patterns, your livelihood programs, all change depend on the terrain and the geography. That
Right.
whole place is so ecologically also fragile that each one has a very distinct nature, personality, character, each state.
Okay. Okay. Okay, ma'am. From your book only, you have quoted this figure that the combined gross state domestic product of Northeast state is less than 3%. And you have cited a variety of reasons for the same, ranging from geographical difficult terrain to the secessionist movements that have been happening there for a long time. My question is, because Northeast sends maybe total of approximately 25 seats to the Lok Sabha. So is that the reason that successive governments in India have shown apathy towards Northeast? There is no lucrative electoral prospect.
I would say that maybe a point, but again, the parliamentarian, the presence also depends on the population. So population numbers are really, really low compared to the rest of India. So
That's why
I
they have
don't.
such low representation in the House.
Yes, exactly so. But also, if you must remember, I mean, right from 47 to, I mean, I would say 1990s and even beyond, Northeast there was a division reorganization of the states. It was originally one Assam, which was then broken down into different states. Reorganization of state took place on, this was not on language, it was on ethnic reorientation. But again, there are so many indigenous ethnic population there. So we've seen over the years, whether it was Nagaland, whether it was Manipur, whether it was Mizoram, and of course Meghalaya, we've had many issues in terms of this ethnic aspiration, how to, kind of, how shall I say, address all those issues, which often turned into insurgent movements. So we've had the longest running insurgent movement from the region. Even today, we are grappling with the Naga movement. There is some kind of a negotiation on, while most of the other movements, insurgent movements, and these kind of ethnic separatist movements, there has been some negotiation, some kind of a center with the state have been able to come to a certain situation where there's some stability. So it is actually this stability which has, and I think the book explains that to some extent, as to why center then started paying greater attention in terms of, it was because once the insurgent movements were taken care of to a certain extent, you're able to do more projects, more other schemes which you were not able to do when there's a disturbance and instability. So it was a catch-22 that if you wanted to do projects, you had to first talk to the issues on the ground, and ground issues in the Northeast across has been very, very difficult.
Okay. Your book title suggests Act East policy is what the book begins with. So how is this Act East different from Look East? I mean, what was the need for Act East when we already had a Look East policy in place?
Yes, so this is exactly, I'm glad you're asking me this, because Look East policy came in the early 90s, if you recall, during Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's time. This was a time when the Southeast economies, they were known as the tiger economies, they were really rising, and yes, the Asian tigers growing. So we realized that in any case, we had some kind of a connect with them through the decades, whether it was Buddhism, then different cultural aspects, and the terrain was similar. There was a continuity in kind of a geography there. But what we realized that we must, because South Asia, as you recall, I mean, despite the fact we talk about potential, economically, South Asia hasn't really been, how should I say, exponentially grown over the last decades. So we realized that we need to kind of grow. If we start collaborating with these economies with whom politically we were connected, we would do well. So actually, the Look East brought about a huge expansion in India's outreach to those Southeast Asian economies. And we've done wonderfully well. I mean, economically and elsewhere, if you see the kind when we started to where we are right now, was, it's actually played a very strong role in enhancing our engagement with them, whether ASEAN as a group or even individually with the states. We've got a lot of bilateral engagement, not only politically, culturally, but mainly economically, which is exactly what we were looking at. But over the years, we also realized, like, if you look at the terrain, which is India, part of South Asia, in between you have a bit of a bridge of Bangladesh coming in from the Bay of Bengal area, and across it, through a very narrow 21 kilometers, you have the Northeast region flanking the East Asia economies. So the Northeast has 99% of its borders with the East Asian economies, and including Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Thailand, China. So we realized that Northeast would actually play a critical role in taking India along to these economies. That's how this Act East came about, where we thought, I mean, that I think was the primary reason the policymakers decided to call it Act East, where you actually put Northeast into the play. earlier India as a whole was engaging with the East Asian economies, but Northeast was being bypassed. So they thought of
Okay.
Northeast geographically stands in between India and East Asia, Southeast Asia. Why should Northeast not be part of it? So that's how Act East was made to involve and engage with Northeast as part of the natural geographical terrain of India, moving into Southeast economies.
So it's a gradual progression from the earlier policy. There is
Yes.
no stark difference between the two.
No, it's actually trying to engage with Northeast more. In fact, it's been a very successful policy for India over the decades. That it started 1991, I think, was official when we actually launched Look
Right.
East, and subsequently it was changed after Prime Minister Modi's first term in
Modi.
2014, and yeah, and it was launched as Act East. It's been a very successful because we are doing a lot of work with them, engaging with them at various sectoral ways with the Southeast Asian economy. So it's been a successful policy in that way, certainly.
Okay. Dr. Datta, we have an online question from Alak Ranjan, and
Okay.
I'm quoting him that do you think that with Myanmar under Tatmada, do you think that Bangladesh will be more important in reaching out to Bay of Bengal and further to Indo-Pacific and also in context of Act East? So the current situations in Myanmar, how important will Bangladesh be for this Act East policy of India?
In fact, Bangladesh plays a very, very critical role in this policy right now. And even we've seen, of course, right now, what he's referring to the coup that's taken place by the Tatmada. But even apart from the coup, in terms of our engagement through the physical infrastructure that we are building with Myanmar, there are 2, 3 main projects. One was the Kaladan multimodal project, which has been
Yes.
really delayed. And we still, and again, the delay has also been because they face several insurgency issues and instability in their own domestic border areas. And just as so the last lap is now going to be built. And of course, the Ritidim road, which is again connecting Manipur to Myanmar, and the main road that we are now building, which is again in progress. Again, we don't have a dateline as such, but the Myanmar, India, Myanmar, Thailand trilateral highway, which is again something which will give us a ease of moving through the 3 countries very seamlessly. But at the same time, if you look at the infrastructure development, if you look at the whole economic and the trading component, Bangladesh is and India's cross-border facilities, cross-border projects have taken over every other project that we've done in the neighborhood. So Bangladesh, of course, right now on the situation with Tatmada, the coup in Myanmar, and we really can't say democratic transition has kind of halted for the time being. We hope things are back to normalcy soon. But here again, Bangladesh, even otherwise, Bangladesh plays a very key role in India's outreach to the Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean. I think, irrespective, even if Myanmar, we are hoping things settle down in Myanmar and we are able to work together. India and Myanmar have a very close relationship, whether from the security point of view or economic engagement. But the kind of infrastructure cross-border projects that we've been able to initiate with Bangladesh, that nobody in the neighborhood has been able to match that. Both the states together, neighbors have been able to take that whole progress and the whole journey forward. So obviously, Bangladesh is a key player here. There is no doubt about that.
Small follow-up question here that it's not the first time that Myanmar has witnessed a coup. It has happened earlier also. So India is surrounded by these not so stable democracies. A certain section in India believes that India must not engage when there is a military coup and must, being the world's largest democracy, go for democratic regime. So would that be a wise thing to do? Because there are so many other factors also.
Yes, there are, first and foremost, you have to have stable borders. If you don't have stable borders, you won't be able to run your government. So that is the first criteria. So how do you have stable borders when your neighbors on both sides are cooperating with you? So when your other neighbor is not stable or you're going through a transition, there are issues. So in this point of time, that has often been used, even when there is a military regime in place, that India had to work closely with Myanmar to address its own security concerns, because there is no way we would have been able to initiate these development projects if there was no stability on the borders. So, but you must remember that while we were actually doing, these kind of outreach with and engaging with the security forces of Myanmar, we were also reaching out to Aung San Suu Kyi. And in almost at the same time, the Nehru Award was given to her, to pass that strong message that we support democracy, we support the transition, but at the same time, we have to be pragmatic. I mean, I think India certainly, I mean, there is no two ways about the fact that India wishes for strong, stable democracies in the neighborhood. I mean, there is no doubt about it. But at the same time, if your own security concerns are not addressed and under unstable condition like that, they are actually, worsened and deterioration of conditions, you have to reach out to security forces who actually stabilize. And armed forces and the military of Myanmar has been very, very supportive in addressing our concerns on the border. So it's been a two-way traffic for us, but we certainly hope that Myanmar, the transition that was taking place in the last decade, will be again, back to the path, and hopefully things will fall in place again. Of course, there is recurrence and periodicity of this problem in Myanmar, but there is not much that one can do but hope that whatever it is, we should be able to keep our own borders stable and have stability within the neighborhood. I mean, that is, of course, the first and the most uppermost criteria for any nation, to keep its own, security concerns addressed.
So, irrespective of the nature of the regime in power, India must engage with them while wishing for democracy, right?
Absolutely, and I don't think we are we are not hesitant about expressing our intention that we want to see democracy being ushered in, being brought in. I mean, this is true for Bangladesh also. We engaged with the military leaders, whether it was Ziaur Rahman with the Ershad. But once democracy returned in 1991, and again, if you look at that in-between period when Bangladesh for 2 years was in that interregnum period, so 2008 December, when elections happened and Awami League came back with a thumping victory, I mean, India was unhesitant with the fact that they really want that kind of democratic governments all across the neighborhood. But at the same time, for reasons of pragmatism and security concerns, you have to do business with whoever is there in the neighborhood.
Okay. Dr. Datta, the next question is that there have been so many secessionist forces in the northeast of India, right from NSCN, and we have had a deal with them of late, ULFA, then there is Tripura Tiger, there has been MNF. So they have certainly impacted the development of the region. So how is current government dealing with these fringe elements?
In fact, most of these fringe elements, as you call them, they were not fringe really. They were at times very strong underlying elements. Yeah, almost. But at the same time, many of these have been addressed. I mean, many of the concerns, I'm not saying it's like 100% settled. And again, the mother of all insurgents was, of course, the Naga insurgency movement. And today there is, yes, NSCM, and there is a kind of a ceasefire. There's agreement in place. It's not resolved. There are territorial issues which need discussion and dialogue. But at the same time, right now, I think on both sides, they realize that end of the day, people want, economic well-being. It's, that whole ideologue at one point of time that this particular land was important. But if you're going to, for the last 70 years, squabble over a piece of land and not able to, produce anything positive for any of the generations on both sides of the border. So right now, of course, I would say there is that bit of ideological factor on the Naga insurgent front, but more or less on the ground, if you look at many of these projects that are underway and situation, work which is underway, is because there's been stability in the area. I mean, we've been able to talk to most of these insurgent groups. The discussion has been on with the state government and the center government, and there has been a lot of rapprochement as compared to in the past, the way situation was. Things have improved certainly over the years.
Okay. You have quoted Prime Minister Modi, what he said on 2nd of November 2019, that we are developing Northeast as the gateway to Southeast Asia. So how is it going to materialize, and how far we have achieved what the Prime Minister said?
As we just discussed, Northeast physically is really the gateway. I mean, it really is between the 2 points of India on one hand and the Southeast Asian economies on the other hand. So it's really actually the physical land link between the two regions of South Asia and Southeast Asia. And the kind of infrastructure developmental projects that have been initiated over the last, 10 years. In fact, earlier, I wouldn't say it was just now. The first breakthrough actually happened in 2010 when India signed the joint communique with Bangladesh. But prior to that, we actually signed up for the multimodal Kaladan multimodal project with Myanmar, which was the first project in the Southeast Asian to reach out to Myanmar and subsequently to the other economies. So the projects are in place. In fact, the book actually details out all the projects that are taking place on the ground. But again, this sector, the sector which is on Bangladesh sector, with crossing all the northeastern economies of Tripura, Assam, Meghalaya, most of them are in place. We've got very successful border huts which have reopened, which is replicating the economy which existed pre-47 and pre-65. So a lot of that has been revived. A lot of the earlier projects, and in terms of having a seamless transit of this particular landmass, which kind of moves into one into the other of northeastern Bangladesh, has been revived. So we are hoping, as I said, that trilateral highway with Myanmar, Thailand, if that's come in place, and the Kaladan project will again connect northeast with the East Asian economy, Southeast Asian economies, also with South Asia and the other part of the South Asian neighborhood of Nepal, Bhutan. So it's actually a work in progress. It's these are long, and again, Northeast has very, very difficult terrain. The weather conditions are very difficult to work under. So I mean, it's barely 5 to 6 months a year that you actually get conducive weather to work on these projects. So it's really difficult. It's not it's not easy to build roads and build these huge projects that are underway at this point of time. But I think it's a work in progress, and certainly a very, very positive effort has been initiated. And I'm sure in years to come we will see that it's given us, like I'm saying, on the other sector between Bangladesh and India, and Nepal and Bhutan. Many of these cross-border projects have shaped very well and already are being used. Similarly, I would say even with Myanmar, I hope there'll be, I mean, again, stability of Myanmar is certainly very important to ensure that these projects are completed on time. Because under such a situation, I'm not sure how much of work can, actually be going on at this point of time. So obviously stability of Myanmar is critical for us to build this physical infrastructure on the road. But again, on the coastal, on the maritime, a lot of work is in progress. Even during pandemic, actually, we were able to ensure that most of the trade, which is not possible through land because of pandemic concerns, took place through the coastal region. So even with Myanmar and Bangladesh, the Bay of Bengal, the ports and the inland waterways have been very well linked. So that's again a positive move. But again, I'm saying it's something that is a work in progress. Hopefully, stability of Myanmar will contribute to the growth and development of this whole region. Needs to kind of it's not an isolated issue. Each one has to be a supportive system on the other hand. So if I just build my part of the road on this side of the north, it's not. We'll have to collaborate and combine it with the projects which are built across the border. So we've been able to very successfully do that with Bangladesh. Work is on with Nepal, Bhutan, and a lot of our transit actually is in place. But with Myanmar, we are hoping that these projects are successfully implemented soon.
Okay. Ma'am, in your book, you have dedicated 2 chapters to the economy of Northeast, and a lot of stress, and it's backed by the empirical evidence, is on agriculture, the impact that agriculture plays in the Northeastern economy, and now it is agriculture and allied sectors. So, isn't there a threshold to the role that agriculture has in the economy? I mean, 80% of population being engaged in agriculture, do they not need to pull out and engage in some other remunerative work?
In fact, related to agriculture, like for instance, one of the very successful products coming out of Northeast in parts of Tripura, parts of Meghalaya is bamboo. which has very
Yes.
successfully created, the industry with it's a project that the government initiated called Bamboo Mission, which has actually led to furniture, led to many allied, house related products to be made. But again, the focus of agriculture in the region is, as I said, the terrain is so difficult. It's hilly, it's narrow. It's impossible to have large industrial projects there. I mean, except for some of the energy projects that we already have there in place in Assam. And if you actually look in details, there was a report, and I think I remember citing that report. It's I think a 2018 report which identifies 181 industries which are functional in the Northeast just now. Over 75% of these industries are based in Assam, because Assam actually offers you a flatter land. So it's, and the weather conditions are also far more manageable. They're not extreme weather conditions, and availability of water and all that other necessary elements that you need to have an industry, and a kind of a I mean, like your labor and other requirement actually has been provided very, and it's of course something that's happened through generations. It's not that it's been initiated only in the recent times. So, but apart from Assam, which is very, I mean, far developed, if you look at all the indicators, Assam is far ahead of them. Of course, Sikkim in some ways is again very ahead also, but Sikkim, of course, is a different example. But even Sikkim or Arunachal or the other states, Mizoram, it's very difficult to actually set up large industries. So if you're looking at economic opportunities there, my main idea here, and I think I've spoken about this in the book in several sections, that we'll have to look at agriculture, which is of course in terms, again, if you look at agriculture also, it's not self-sufficient. It still needs to buy from outside, the mainland India provides for it is basic rice and other. But at the same time, again, there is a debate about how terrace cultivation at one point of time was thought that it's not conducive, it doesn't contribute to healthy growth. But again, there is a new element being brought in now, that you need to know how to recultivate land, and because of the terrain, terrace cultivation is actually something which is possible to do. And I mean, newer methods of agriculture patterns are coming in, newer seeds are being brought in, newer techniques and new instruments, and other things are being introduced as development happens in every sector. So my point is that if you base industries which is based on agriculture, something like organic, like if Meghalaya is very known for its organic haldi. So in fact, the turmeric, that the best turmeric capacity in India grows from there. But again, because of the limited land availability, economies of scale does not make it possible for it to grow at a larger space. So obviously the limited capacities because of the terrain, and also whether very uneven weather conditions. So what you can take for granted in other parts, like in Assam, you can take for granted because it's got predictable weather. But Meghalaya, Mizoram, Arunachal certainly don't have predictable weather. So while one year you have an excellent crop of strawberries, and you think that next year you will do, and then you have a kind of a we are also, as part of this, trying to understand the region and what can grow better. We were trying to see if you can have a develop a value chain of products, in the sense that, for instance, I'm saying, for example, Bangladesh is the particular company who was very keen. In fact, they had also invested in Meghalaya and Assam at that point of time, Tripura actually, in fruit juices. So they were saying that you provide us with the raw material, we have the expertise, we have the machinery, we have the skill sets, and also they were giving us, investment in funding. But unfortunately, we were not able to, guarantee that product, the amount that they need to make it a successful product. So even if I'm looking at, industry growth, I'll have to base myself on what the region is capable of producing. So again, textile is something that I've looked, and I'm Northeast textile is phenomenal. I mean, their designs, their patterns, but because again it's handmade, there's a huge amount of, we're not being able to up the scale. So they're expensive, but we are trying to see if it's possible to, put an investment here and see if that is possible to, kind of develop it at a lower rate, I would say, because right now it's not viable to sell outside. So every product and every economic value product that we are looking at has to be something which is growing there, or the natural resources there. Natural resources, again, like oil, as you know, in Assam we have the oil companies based there. Hydropower has been tapped wherever it's been possible. Right now, again, in today's ecological environment, we say that large hydro projects are not viable. They are not environment safe. So we are looking at mini hydro projects. We are looking at solar projects. So these are small level experiments. Again, the scale of experiments or the scale of projects is not large, but at certain level there has been successfully implemented. But again, most of it again is back to the agriculture and agro related industry.
Okay. Last year, the government amended the citizenship. The CA was brought, Citizenship Amendment Act, and there were protests in many parts of India, including protests in Northeast, especially in Assam. So, what apprehensions people in Northeast have, despite some states having the provision of inner line permit? Government has categorically stated that there will be no tweaking with the provisions of ILP. Then what makes people apprehensive about the CA and the NRC in Northeast?
If you see over the years, while a policy is in place, but when you actually, deal with it on a day-to-day basis, you realize that in terms of the actual law, the rule, there is an apathy on the ground in terms of the government machinery and the people. So even at the NRC level, if you recall, there are many people who've lived there for generations, were told that your paper is not in place. I mean, you need to, provide the fact that you are a citizen of this particular country. And the kind of legal issues they went through, I mean, the kind of, I mean, on paper, it looks that you actually have a redressal mechanism in place. But I personally know people who had to travel 50 kilometers to another, commission inquiry place, judicial, to submit papers, and again be told that no, this is incomplete paperwork, we need some other, but there are a lot of people, and there's a generation when this was not digital. The generation now has everything digitally, captured. A lot of paperwork is actually missing, so that actually, I think, really brought out the fear in many people. Again, there are a lot of, and we've seen this, how religion has been an issue again in the region. And there are again people who feel that they would be again victimized because they belong to a particular religion. Again, I agree, the government has stated often that you won't be, but on the ground, and because we visit the place so often, we actually hear of instances where people were helpless. There was absolutely nobody to listen to those issues, to address, and I mean, they were at times not even sure that what is that exact paperwork that you need to establish yourself as a citizen. So inner land permit, as you recall, was part of the Northeast narrative of Banpai, where they didn't want a Northeast, this whole insurgent movement was about outsiders swamping in. So they felt that, if other people coming in from the neighborhood would be brought in, because I think that was the whole policy, that we would, allow the minority sections who felt fear or whatever in the neighborhood would be allowed in, and they felt that they would swamp into these particular pockets. A lot of states who didn't have inner line permit, had done away with inner line permit, actually brought in the whole narrative all over again, but again, while at one level it's fine, the political leadership has explained, but again on the ground we've seen that in many instances, this is not the first one, that Northeast regions have been constantly dealing with political issues on the ground. So there's a fatigue, of course, that how long do we have to prove ourselves? We've just dealt with instability versus in terms of the outsider and the insider debate, which went on for years, and there were many untoward incidents, whole lot of violence. I mean, the kind of violence that has taken place in the Northeast for the several decades is, I mean, for us from outsiders, we can kind of just sympathize, but people who actually live that on a day-to-day basis, it's been a very, very difficult journey. So for them to have this particular wound reopened, and again this whole fear and insecurities as to where do we go from here? I mean, again, do I have to prove who I am? When I've been here, it's not that I've just come in once the border was open. They've been there for generations. But this whole debate, and this, despite I would say assurances, there's very little clarity on paperwork. Even if you recall, when the first NRC list was done, there were lakhs who were left out of the list, who were part of this whole citizen group. I mean, we've never questioned them, but because of some lack of papers, there's been an issue. So it's actually, I would say it's not send the right messages. Just when you're, wanting to initiate developmental projects. You want to, for very long, Northeast was, the whole security narrative was predominant, that it's unstable, its own domestic disturbances are on, influences from outside. We've seen how China had influenced, and there's lots of stories about how these insurgent groups were in the neighborhood trained. They were given lots of arms and ammunitions. So that was a whole journey that they went through, and the pain and the grief of that. Now that has settled, and now from that whole security paradigm to now open up this region to say that you will be seeing a new developmental journey. And then suddenly this whole rollback about this whole political debate again, I think was a huge setback for the Northeasterns, because again the development journey can't happen overnight. And again, the book also talks about the fact that kind of development journey that you see in other parts of India, what you see is possible in, say, Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, is not possible here because of the limitations of the ground. So I have, and the book constantly talks about that there has to be a bottoms-up approach of developmental paradigm here to initiate projects which are inherent to the land, which are inherent to the people. It has to collaborate and kind of mull in with your own skill sets. You can't have a kind of new projects or new industry being built where your own people are not part of that, and you have a rush of outsiders coming in. This is something which is not acceptable to the Northeast. So we have to be sensitive to that. So to expect that what we've been able to do by huge other projects in other parts of India, which successfully so, I think is not possible in the Northeast. And we must understand that, again, as I'm saying, that each Northeast has gone through several layers of a journey which is full of pain, full of a whole lot of instability. So just when things were stabilizing, they were looking towards a very positive paradigm just now. It wasn't anymore of disturbances and violence. They were trying to move away from that. But this whole political debate on CA actually again opened those wounds.
So the development projects in Northeast have to be a lot more Northeast centric, and there have been domestic indigenous logistics issues which have largely contributed to these apprehensions that people there have with CA and NRC.
Yes, absolutely. So, even the industries and everything that you look at, I mean, whether it's this organic farming and many of these small, I mean, so I've actually suggested and I've identified in details what are the small and the medium level industries that we could look at in, building there. And there's lots of potential. Also, a lot of recent economic data actually tells you that many of these small, medium-sized industries are able to actually give employment to a large number. And this is exactly what we want. And Northeast is very, very, I would say, suspicious about how outside elements would come in to grab jobs. That's not the idea for them. While I think Northeasterns, for a variety of their own skill sets, have been able to do wonderful work in the rest of India. I mean, if you see, because of the lack of opportunity within the region, many of them actually have moved out to different parts of India and doing fabulous work in whether it's a medical sector, whether it's in the retail sector, various other places. Northeasterns have actually found their own niche. But at the same time, in terms of the future generations, we are looking at products, we are looking at economic facilities which we can develop, which actually is going to be beneficial to the people of Northeast themselves. You don't have to think of how others can be provided here. You have to examine how livelihood programs, how other provisions can be, brought in, initiated, which will actually bring an advantage to. So even higher education has been introduced. Many such schemes and projects are underway. It's not that they're not, but again, there is something that, for a region that's kind of pulled back for so long, not moved at the same pace of the rest of India for so long, to get them on the same pace is going to take an effort. I'm just saying that let nobody think that just because we've initiated some projects, some cross-border infrastructure projects, and some other schemes, that overnight there'll be a transformation. This region can't absorb overnight transformation. In fact, I don't think this region ecologically is capable of taking these large, substantial projects, absorbing them. So you'll have to go step by step. And I think, again, in the book, I'm not sure whether you've seen that, I've talked about how border economies are intrinsic part of the narrative. And yeah.
We have an online question. Aman is asking how Chinese interference, especially in Bhutan post Dolam and now post Galwan, will impact the Northeast region.
I think, as I mentioned just a bit earlier, that over the years we've seen Chinese influence in terms of support to the insurgent, in terms of their training, in terms of their supply of arms and all of that. So that fear psychosis remains. I mean, it was done in the past. Of course, right now there is we've not seen any evidence of that. But the fact that they're coming so close to our borders, and we've seen how I mean, Doklam was addressed by India both of them, India and Bhutan, very ably they've been addressed. But China, as I see it, in the years to come, is constantly going to try and nibble away in the region. They will try and put they're an economic dominant player. So the kind of projects that they've been able to initiate with the neighborhood is, I mean, it's obvious, we can see that. While one may say that how much has it actually translated on ground in terms of actual fund and investment coming in, of course, that's in question. And while we often talk about Nepal in that context, that a lot of grandiose projects are in place, but actually on the ground, if you look at, I mean, at least I'm going by the Nepal bank statistics, there hasn't been much funds which has come in, but the plans and projects are in place and they're very visible. They're very visible, and that's true for Bangladesh. That's certainly true for Myanmar. If you recall, some time ago, also Myanmar went through this, we're going through this process where they're saying let's cancel some of the contracts that's been done. There's some dam projects, some port projects that the neighborhood was trying to cancel because of this. So even particular to Bhutan, which is again, it's just like few feet away from the Northeast region, their presence is something that one is, and which is actually what is the reason why for a variety of reasons, that I think the security forces in India decided to hold back Northeast. So the development projects started much later because you felt if you kept them isolated and insulated, influence from outside would be diminished. But we have now realized that you actually need to prop up and ramp up your development projects to keep your place safe. The earlier project that let not anybody come to your border, let's not have facilities where people are able to bring in troops or whatever you're fearing. Right now, the narrative has changed. Let equip everybody, let the borders actually develop much more fully, so that you are able to, suppose you do have a threat on your border, you will able to address it very purposefully and strongly. So, but I think the fears remain on about Bhutan, about the rest of the neighborhood. There is no doubt on that front.
Okay. Here's another question. Anushir is asking, what did China gain out of Ladakh standoff? And was a tactic to cut Modi to size, has it gone wrong for China?
It was, China, if you recall, has, I mean, despite the fact there are several bilateral mechanisms in place with India over years in terms of border resolution, other things, but there's just no movement forward. They've kept that border issue always, it's kind of festering. At the same time, if you recall, just sometime before that, you've had the Mamallapuram, summit between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, which was all bonhomie and all that. And soon after, you had these, Galwan attacks. So China, I mean, and of course, there's a lot of hype about how India is a rising power in Asia. And maybe that's something that, China is not happy to hear. You also find now, I mean, every single power across the global community, whether it's US, whether it's Japan, whether it's Australia, they all want to, engage with India very strongly. So Indian notion, that whole space is becoming very critical, and India is a very strong player for all of these major powers. That's not something I think China is very happy to see. So, I mean, they would constantly try, doing these kind of tactics are something which I don't think they've, I would hope they've learned their lesson, but little that I understand of China, they will find more little pokes and gaps to kind of focus. They're not going to go away so easily. And while at the same time, they also understand that India is very resolute in addressing it. I mean, India will not take anything lying down. They will, and also in terms of the security forces, extremely able, capable, capacity and capability of India is, of course, well understood by every single power, including China. So there is nothing that India will take lying down. It is, there will be repercussions to every such act and move. But China is, a seasoned, hardened player again. So I don't think that you will find that China has learned its lesson and, like they say, put your tail behind you and kind of pack away. I don't see that happening. I wish it was. I wish it was, and I hope I'm proven wrong. But in the years to come, in the months to come, I can very well see China looking at some other corners where they would want to, try and create as much disturbances as they can.
Okay, so this post-COVID and post-Galwan, a new world order seems to be emerging. And as you rightly said, that India has to be very, very selective in its approach towards its northeast, because these projects, whatever projects India is trying to bring in northeast for development, are a lot different from what India does in any other state because of the intrinsic factors in northeast. So, what should be the right approach of India now to go for all the development projects in northeast? Should it be a very, yes, please?
Yes, in fact, some of the, immediately during the pandemic, we realized, and this was, I think, a two-pronged thing, that our hostility on the Ladakh side with China was, of course, peaking at that point of time. And also because of pandemic, we realized a lot of our economic dependence that we've grown with China and the other economies was actually hampered us in terms of logistics not being in place. There was a kind of break at that point of time. So some of us actually, in fact, from VIF, I've initiated a project where I'm trying to see if it's possible. We keep discussing this, that South Asia is the least integrated region of the whole world, not only Asia, but this whole the South-South cooperation, which is basically the Asian economies, have actually developed and grown substantially in the last few decades. But even in the South-South, cooperation platform, South Asia has held back. But at the same time, and some of us are part of this, part of the study that we are doing just now. So, given that the countries of South Asia, I'm not even discussing Pakistan, India, I'm discussing South Asia by itself. I think each requirement, each need for every country is different. So it's very, very difficult to, put them all on the same platform and say, okay, this is good for Afghanistan, so this is good for Sri Lanka. So what I have suggested, and in the study we've done a first round of it, and we've put up a report which has been appreciated by the neighbors, about how we should have a sub-regional approach to development of the thing. So in fact, if you recall, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal is a sub-regional group. There was a multi-vehicular agreement signed, where the idea was to actually have seamless travel movement, cargo movement and passenger movement amongst the four countries. In the last minute, Bhutan, for a variety and mainly for environmental reason, had to step out. So we are now reworking on the agreement, where again it's Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. So the idea again post-pandemic is, and again post-pandemic we realize your core interest in terms of public health has become so important. I mean, while public health, if you look in South Asia, none of the countries actually devote much percentage of the GDP to public health. So this has become a core issue now. And so we are saying sub-regional, if you look at that whole way, so whatever is possible in terms of enhancing your capacities, in terms of developing not only industries to the regional value chain, as I said. So some industries are possible through very effective and cheap labor, which is available in Bangladesh. You can get the land in Nepal, which is possible. It's at a cheaper rate, and machinery and tools and other things that India can provide, and also a lot of expertise Sri Lanka can. So this is something that we are now working on. Again, if you look at this, we are all very strong on textile export, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India. So this is again something that we have a niche. All of us have that expertise, which is the reason that we are not able to develop with each other, but we've been able to enhance our economic potential with the outside world so much because of that niche that we've developed. So right now we are able to, so public health sector is something that we are working on closely, and also building, food value chains, small agro patterns and industry patterns in the sub-region slowly. But again, every country is trying to, at a certain level is very protectionist in terms of their policies. They don't want to allow other, commodities from outside to flood their markets when it's not, their own products are not competitive. So whether it's India, whether it's Sri Lanka, everybody has these initial protectionist tendencies. So this is something you need to break away in terms of looking at the larger value as to how, if 10 years from now, how do you protect your industries, but at the same time provide greater potential in terms of providing employment, developing better, better products, and ability to also sell them outside, or people who can absorb. So this is again, I think pandemic has shown us a lot of things that we can do, which wasn't possible earlier. One never thought about it. And as I said, during pandemic, while the border trade in the region had halted, but we were able to, for the first time, in fact, inland waterways has been something that Bangladesh has very effectively used. We've never been able to use it. It's there, it's always there on paper and some movement, but not effective. But this time, coastal shipment as well as maritime inland waterways was something that we were able to use effectively. So we are also building up ports. We are trying to link up ports in the South Asian region with others. So hopefully in the years to come, I mean, it's a cobweb of network which is being, developed in the region. So, and again, it's easy to say all this, but actually, while their hardware is being, being built, and it takes time, given our South Asian ways of building. It's not only in India, it's elsewhere in South Asia. We often miss our timelines. Though our recent rate with Nepal was very good, we were able to build the energy line pipeline much before the scheduled time. So there are some wonderful success stories also. But along with the hardware, we have to actually, all of us simultaneously develop the software. Because if your GPS tracker to all your other software in terms of ensuring that the same levels are not there, then it's impossible to handle these cross-border trade implementation. So that's, again, I think all the neighbors together are trying to ensure that you have able to have a seamless cargo movement, passenger movement, and ensure that your trade in the region becomes more robust, as well as trade. I mean, everybody would trade wherever you get more benefits. So every country, whether it's Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India, we have greater trade with Europe and America and the other parts of the world. That won't stop. Nobody's saying that will stop. But at the same time, how is it that we can also support each other through a greater, more robust economic engagement? And that's part of a study that I'm right now undertaking at the VF myself.
Wonderful. Dr. Datta, one more thing you have mentioned in your book, that Northeast has not always been a politically stable region. There have been political instability in that region. Currently, most of the states are ruled by the BJP. In Northeast, BJP is running a coalition in 2 of the Northeast states, and then the party is doing wonderfully on the national political spectrum. So, will this allay any fears from the mind of in the people of Northeast, or as the current ruling party is seen as a majoritarian or known for a very muscular nationalistic approach, it will dim their chances in Northeast?
In fact, this is exactly also something that's been referenced to this in the book, that was the first time we have the state governments of the Northeast working very closely with the central government of Northeast.
Yes.
Earlier, they were always at cross purposes. The minute center said something, state said, no, this is not acceptable. The communication lines possibly were not all that great. And again, for a variety of reasons, the center was, they were providing funds constantly. So that was not in question. But in terms of initiating projects, making them part of it,
there's a lot more coherence today.
Yes, and because, as you said, because the same political party is in states as well as center. So not only there is an underlying philosophy in this whole thing that we need to grow together. That growth, for your growth is good for my growth. It wasn't earlier. If you are growing, then it was seen as something that's a negative aspect for me. Right now, that if I grow, then you also grow with me. In fact, another, of course, it's in a different note. I remember the Deputy Chief Minister of Assam made this, that during pandemic, he said that the first time they were actually reintroducing, with opening up the borders again, in terms of, they were saying for the first time, alcohol is an issue here in terms of the local excise duties. He's saying we actually got together, all the chief minister, 4 of them, and we decided that we must keep the same excise duties, because otherwise people used to move from one state to the other to pick up cheaper alcohol. Yes. And he said that is chaos at the borders, unnecessary. And why did we do that for so long? So, these are collaborative mechanisms which have come into place, and he said this in a lighter tone, but he said this can be replicated elsewhere. So when you on a political philosophy on the same page, then it's easy for you to sit together and see what are the mechanisms, what are the initiate issues and programs which will take everybody together on the positive journey. It's not that if you grow, then I'm held back. So so right now, suppose one particular state is not able to grow something which they require. It's possible to do that, and this is also, I'm discussing this in a larger context in the book, that how we are constantly talking about water shortages. And we have this particular irritation with Bangladesh just now, because they feel that we've not signed what the agreement on Tista, because we thought that I mean, for again our own domestic reason. But the point is, right now we have to be look at the whole argument in a different way, examine it through the fact that if you, why do you need water for your products, right? For developing a particular rice, wheat, whatever you need to eat. So if you're able to tell us, or each one discuss the patterns, that what is the agri pattern that you require, you need for your own domestic consumption as well as for exporting. So similarly, if the states can do that amongst themselves in the northeast and across the border, that's something, it's a very viable. I mean, it's most developed mature democracies or nations have been able to do that. And again, I'll come back to the last two chapters of mine, which talks about building a border community. So right now, the border huts is something which connects the borders in between Bangladesh and Myanmar, Bangladesh and India. We're also hoping that Myanmar and India would be able to do that. We have More Tamu, which is a open in the sense of the trade and people movement takes place through there, and the other points there. But of course, right now there's no point discussing it. But my idea of taking this forward was, if we use the border points to actually these border huts, which is very effective, very welcome on both sides. I mean, nobody imagined that the kind of success and the kind of response it would get from both sides. So if we can develop that into initiating larger issues for people, whether it's public health, because again, border people, irrespective of which border you're, whether my border, Bangladesh border, Nepal border, Bhutan border, you don't have access to the services that mainland does. So why in today's world, when your transport systems are in place, your technology is so much more in place than it was decades ago, why are we not able to provide services which is needed by the people? So whether it's education, see, all of these countries, English is the common medium, which is a huge advantage, that irrespective of whatever mother tongue they use, but everywhere, if you look, especially at the higher education level, but most of these borderland people are deprived of very quality education. So this is something, if you can build that, and then also not only that, in terms of developing your livelihood programs, you're ensuring, see, nobody wants it, I mean, anymore. That whole idea that you have to have these higher degrees for a job is not required anymore. These, now your vocational trainings become more important. Your tourism is such a, your certification courses on tourism would actually get you a job than a master's degree from a university. So if we can look at vocational and livelihood programs, something that the new generation need on both sides. And again, the marginal, the border people on both sides are ignored by the mainland because, again, variety of reasons, distances, nobody, but so we are able to, through the fact that we have such friendship on the border now with Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, why are we not able to develop that? And again, look at cross-border industry, agro patterns, look at everything which you can collaborate on, and which is basically people centric. The whole thing has to be people centric. I mean, we have to move away from this, government to government relationship as one level, state to state levels are there, but the entire, I mean, this whole landscape that we are discussing is actually people oriented, right? What is all this meant for? So if you can get people to people connected on a variety of, whether it's cultural, social, and more important, the factors which make a difference, like education, health, and subsequent employment and opportunities ahead, I think there's a scope to actually transform the lives of people here and transform the landscape into a far more positive trajectory. And we've always held back thinking of negative narratives of security. Our neighbors have ensured that our security concerns are addressed. It's a mutual thing that we do. BIMSTEC, if you know, the one of the regional organization, again, on where all the neighbors are together, some of the core issues which are being addressed here are security concerns. That's been such an effective collaboration. When that effective collaboration is in place, why should we not take it to the next level? And I think our border development program is essential to ensuring that people on all sides of in the region are actually benefit from this. And it's not in the mainland, it's going to be a positive, kind of scheming into each other. I mean, it has to be that. And I think that's the way forward, really.
So to conclude, for the success of Act East policy, a stable, a prosperous Northeast is needed. And for that, of course, there has to be a lot more to be done rather than just giving money as Delhi has always done. There has to be a lot indigenous-centric approach where people of Northeast are given due advantage of whatever development work is being done over there.
Yes, I mean, the whole point in this whole act is thing that while you're also ensuring that one very good thing of this act is policy is of the first time Northeast will be connected with each other. For even Mizoram to actually go to Arunachal Pradesh, or people from Assam to go into other parts of Sikkim was difficult because your own connections were so low. But I mean, something which I find is, going to, it's a beginning right now. The railways have started. I mean, there are only 2 sectors where they build railways. So your people movement will change. And the way you look at that whole, how you approach each other. So otherwise, you're very insulated. You didn't know what was happening in your own region. So not only within the region that you're going to have movement and, a kind of an information gateway, but also from Northeast with the rest of India and Northeast with the rest of the neighborhood. So there are 3 kind of subsequent development projects that are taking place, and it'll open up I think a huge plethora of opportunities ahead. And it can, I mean, there are many issues which we need to address. I mean, there are many gaps, and I think the book is all about it, looking at the gaps. I've on very specific areas examined the gaps and how you need to address it. But in large, I would say this whole larger proposal that is in place, and some of it has been implemented very successfully, some is in progress, hopefully some will come along the way, will actually get Northeast connected with its own region, with rest of India, with the neighborhood, in a way which has never been seen before, which will again, right now it's difficult to sit and calculate what that will mean. It opens up a huge vistas of cooperation and development paradigm. So
that remains to be seen how it will materialize.
Yes, but I'm largely upbeat. But we'll have to be again very cognizant of the political sensitivities. And again, I think you need to understand what Northeast wants for themselves. I think let us not tell them what they need. We must hear them. We must understand what is their concern, what is that they want for themselves. They don't want fancy, shiny malls. They don't want fancy lifestyles like we see in urban India. They want something. Let's try and deliver what they want. I think that should be the basic core things that we need to address. The rest will fall in place slowly.
So India needs to be upbeat, but with a lot of caution. Correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely, you said it perfectly.
So on this note, I would end this discussion, and thank you, Dr. Datta, for this wonderful chat about your new book, and it's wonderful reading this book. Wish you all the best for this book. Thanks to all our viewers also. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.